Morning, everybody. Happy Father's Day. Give us some time for everybody to get online.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yeah.
Morning, Chris.
What could this be? It's
Hey,
the
Karen and
White
Martin.
Blues.
Good morning all around. Hey, Beth. Hey, Dina. Hey, Lorena. Hey, Cindy over on YouTube. Morning, Mom. Hey, Beth. Yeah, thanks, Dina. Hey, Lisa. Deanne, thanks. Hey, Bridget and Mary Jo. Hey, Bat, Gladys, and Pat. Glad you liked it, Lisa. Morning, Avi. Hey, Pat. Hey, Heather. Morning, Pamela. Hey, Donna. Hey, Colleen. Oh, I got this on completely the wrong frame here. Oh, geez. There we go. That's better. Feel like I'm doing that a lot lately. I must be getting slow. Morning, everybody. We're pushing some buttons over here. Morning, Betsy. Morning, Timberly. Hey, Jordana. Hey, Heather. Hey, Dwayne and Pamela. Hey, Betsy, Beth, Joanne, Christine. I know I missed some people there. Hey, Susan. Morning, Rosemary. Yeah, happy Father's Day all around. Let me see if I can put up this picture. Might be way too big. Yeah, here's my kid with his parenting team. Amazing that he is now a high school graduate. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Libby. Hey, Phil. Oh, hey, Sarah. Welcome to Chicago.
What you call a powerhouse.
Hey, Karina.
Yeah, Earl Father Hines carries on now and presents Leroy Harris.
Hey, Nancy.
Teacher's pet.
What was I just reading happened where the Hilton is now? I think it's the one that's the old Stevens Hotel. There was something that came up just lately. I can't think what it was now. Morning, Hal. Morning, Sunshine. And live tours are on Saturdays. Nancy. So far, we're doing live tours on Saturday. We're still in this kind of weird situation for live events right now where numbers for virtual events are way down, but numbers for in-person events aren't really way up. So, we're kind of tiptoeing back towards things right now. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Amy. Oh, I remember what happened at the Hilton, but I can't say it on this tour. It would have to be on the After Hours one. It involved Jimi Hendrix. Hey, Susan. Hey, Robert. Hey, Alex. Hey, Linda. Morning, Elaine. Robert. Thank you, Elaine. Morning, Jan. Hey, Tom and Corin. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Denise. Hey, Sherry Ann. Morning, Phoenix. Hey, Nancy. Alright, there's already more people than I thought were going to be here today, honestly. Hey, Susan. Hey, Tashera. Hey, Bob. Numbers for this would have been very low. Oh, hey, Kristen. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Robert. Hey, Kyle and Maria.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Karen. Hey, Lynn. Morning, Tato, over on Twitch. Hey, Joanne, it's only the second time I've done this one. Hey, and I actually rewatched the original this morning. I almost never rewatch tours, but I kept feeling like there was things I was forgetting about this one. It's been kind of the issue with doing so many new tours over the course of the past years. There's a lot of stuff that I've had to learn and then have to quick move on to learning other stuff, so it kind of runs out of my head eventually. Hey, Mary in Nashville. Hey, Kyle. Hey, Bob. Hey, Linda. Hey, well, things will even out numbers-wise after a while. That's the general word. Hey, Linda. Hey, Christy. Everything's kind of in flux right now, and no one knows what's going to happen or what's going on. It's been that way for a while. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Laura. Yeah, the new stuff I have to learn for all the new tours kind of crowds some of the other new stuff out.
Father Hines melody of the Colorado Sunset.
Morning, Connie. Hey, Diane. Hey, Rocky O. Yeah, Glenn, when I do things like bus tours and boat tours where you do the same thing over and over, it takes, after about a year off, it takes 4 or 5 tours for it all to come back. Sometimes a little more. The trick with these ones is I usually do them once and then move on, once and then move on. Hey, Amy. Hey, Batty. Hey, Susie up there. Happy Father's Day all around. Hey, Rose. Hey, Crit. Morning, Lisa. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Cindy. Good morning all around, everybody. Well, that's kind of it. It's like I have to move on to other new stuff all the time, so such new stuff as I had to start with doesn't always stick around. Hey, Karen. And I've lately started going through and like making notes of some of the stories that I did for a mini tour 1 or 2 days that then was just gone in a couple of days. There's been so many things I've researched in the past 15 months that didn't get used for anything else after a couple of months. So, morning, Karen and Karen. Hey, Sue. Yeah, and of course, happy Father's Day. Here is my kid with his whole parenting team. Just a couple of weeks ago, after he graduated from high school. This is actually a recreation of one that we did when he was much younger. Let me export that one, too. I love these pictures. We still got a minute or two before we're going to get started, after all. We always give it till a couple of minutes after 10, that's when people start turning up. Yeah, there's, this I think is about 9 or 10 years ago, somewhere in there. This is my I just drove 6 hours hair. And then we recreated this a couple of weeks ago when he graduated. Married parenting team's about the best way to describe it, I think. Joseph. No, I don't think that the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge hit any tours that I was working with at the time. I can't remember which company that was that got hit, but I was not there that day, but every time we pass that bridge, I have us all bow our heads because we remember. We remember. Morning, Anita. Hey, Lenora. I will say one major difference between this shot and this shot, he's a lot harder to pick up than he was back then. Back when all he would eat was frozen chicken nuggets. Hey, Laura. Hey, Lisa, Jacqueline, and Aaron. Morning, Geraldine. We'll give Earl Father Hines, perfect for Father's Day, Earl Father Hines. Hey, MJ in Chicago on YouTube. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes until the end of this Earl Father Hines song, and then we'll get going. Hey, Cheryl on YouTube. Yes, they eventually eat more than chicken nuggets, Kristen. It takes a while. There was a long period where Aiden was deeply suspicious with any food that didn't come out of a box in the freezer. And I notice even like with especially 8th grade groups and occasionally even up through high school, when I'm with school groups, there's often a kid who will only eat one thing on any menu and freaks out if we go to a place where the group menu doesn't include that option, and almost 100% of the time, that food is chicken nuggets. When I had to take 100 McDonald's orders, like 97 of them were for McNuggets. Kids today are much more chicken nugget oriented than they used to be. But yeah, Aiden did eventually get to the point where he would eat pretty much anything. It's a lot easier, but a lot more expensive. Hey Mona, hey Rosita, hey John. But okay, I think I just talked right through the end of that Earl Father Hines song, which means it is time to get going. All right. Welcome along, everybody. That's a charming way to open with me coughing like that. So, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years, and for the last year and a half, a virtual tour guide as well. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago from 2016, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Ghosts of Chicago, now a rare collector's item, and even a novel called Just Kill Me, which is about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them, with a backstory based on one of the stories that I'll be telling later on today. I'm also on the Smithsonian Channel, the History Channel, and the Travel Channel all the time. I'm going to be going to Minnesota to film some History Channel stuff next month, so we should get some cool virtual tours out of that. So I am, after all, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. But today, we are going to be talking about River North. River North is the neighborhood just north of the Loop, just across the river, that's over a little bit west of the Magnificent Mile, but including stuff, we tend to call it Bro Town nowadays. It's where you go if you want to see a whole lot of dude bros, that in Wrigleyville. But also mixed in with this, there are a lot of old mansions left over from the days when this was a largely residential area. There's stuff left over from when this was a really remarkably rough area. There's even a little bit of relics here and there of the era in the 1970s was when it was where you would want to go if you wanted to find a leather bar. But we're going to start with one of my favorite stories, of which nothing really remains, but it gives you a good idea of what River North looks like these days. You've got these parking garages, and in the middle of it, you've got these old houses and mansions. This is the the 2 East block of Huron Street. Now, what we're going to talk about really, though, is a building that was right where this high-rise on the left is now. Now, check out behind the tree. You can see this this dome on top of a turret. We'll get a better view of it right there. Now, what used to be where that big high-rise is now is a building that looked like this. And if you look to the right in this old picture, you can see that onion dome right over there. So if I move this over just slightly, we should be able to exactly mark out the place where this was. This place was a place called an old mansion, a townhouse at 8 East Huron, that in the 1960s was the offices of an organization called Finders Inc., the people who find anything. That was their business model. If you had something you needed to look for and couldn't find it, you would just call them. Now, here's a picture of some people. The unbearded guy in the middle holding up this sign is Barry Ziggy Stone. He was one of the founders of the organization. On the left, taking the picture, is Del Close, one of the founders of the Second City, and one of the founders of the improv movement in general in Chicago, which was also something Barry Ziggy Stone was a part of back in those days. Finders Incorporated was deeply tied into the comedy scene, but as a day job, he would work like this, but there was always a comedic aspect to the kind of things they would claim to be able to find. Like at one point, there was they said that they needed to find a violin stuffed with kosher hot dogs. Specifically, kosher hot dogs. I hate to think they were actually going to eat them. Or in one case, he had to find a monkey that could play Monopoly for a commercial that was being filmed. And this, of course, meant that he had to find a monkey and then teach it how to play Monopoly. Which he told the newspapers took him a couple of days. Personally, I feel like it wouldn't be that hard. You just have to sit down the monkey and lay down the law. You're like, listen, that thing where you get $500 for landing on free parking, that is a house rule, not a real rule. Around here, monkey, we play by the book. But every now and then they would find stuff that they couldn't even identify. There would be things like, once they found this bust, couldn't figure out who it might even be. Have you been looking for a bust of President Garfield or Sigmund Freud? You could say it was either one of those. For just a minute there, I thought it was something I shouldn't even really show you. A bust of Martin Ryerson that sits inside of his tomb. Looks kind of similar. If he grew some more hair and trimmed down his beard, this might about be a match. Problem is, it's a match for pretty much every guy in the 1880s. Every white guy, anyway. But Barry Ziggy Stone ran this place as a day job while also pulling pranks. Like, if you got an invitation for an afternoon on the train with Barry, you knew to pack for about 3 days. And he would probably show up wearing a monocle or something, and you'd be recreating a Teddy Roosevelt campaign trip. But I was even able to get Barry on the phone one time. When I first discovered the newspaper articles about this, I got really excited, wanted to write it into a children's book. In particular, there were mentions in the newspapers of the Finders catalog, which was all of the stuff that they found but couldn't sell. Like, people would come to them saying, I've heard that it's a great luck omen to give your fiance a black bear tooth. Can you find me a black bear tooth? And they would find one, but they'd have to buy it in a bundle with lots of other kinds of teeth. Or if somebody needed a bust of Louis Pasteur, they would get a bust, but it might come bundled with other things as well. So they ended up with all kinds of weird stuff that they would sell in their catalog. I really wanted to find a copy of this catalog. I haven't pulled it off yet. I got Barry on the phone. He's been working as a television producer in San Francisco since the 1970s. He says that he's still got a couple in a warehouse someplace, but he kind of seemed to think like I might be from the IRS or something like that. He seemed kind of suspicious of me. But operated right here in River North, and right around the corner from there, the pictures are wrong. I hate when that happens. We'll restart the video. Right around the corner from that is the old St. James Episcopal Church. Well, this is version number 3. There was a version of it originally that was about a block south of here. Then they moved it up over to here. Then it burned down. Then the Great Chicago Fire happened. But St. James Episcopal Church has a particular claim to fame, is that Abraham Lincoln attended a service here in the pre-fire version. And that's pretty unusual. Abraham Lincoln was not just in general a church-going guy. I think nowadays if you gave him a survey, he would probably check the spiritual but not religious box. He hardly ever actually attended services. But in 1860, shortly after being elected president, when he came to Chicago to meet with Hannibal Hamlin, his soon-to-be vice president, and greet the public, he ended up attending a service here at St. James. Now, most of the building was destroyed a few years later in the Great Chicago Fire, but really quite a bit of it did survive that fire. It's right in the fire zone, but right in the interior of the lobby now, they still have their Civil War memorial that was built just before the fire and actually survived the fire. Now, this was a memorial designed by the firm of Frederick Law Olmsted, an architect who is generally better known for landscape architecture, designing things like Central Park or the World's Fairgrounds here in Chicago, or city planning the suburb of Lyon here in Chicago. He's a guy who comes up over and over in research. But this was a memorial to the members of the church who had gone off to fight in the Civil War and had then not come back. There were quite a few of them out of this one church, and really just going down the list, I would notice, like, there's so many of my Graceland guys there. It's like, oh, I know him, I know him, I know him. Most notably, my favorite one to talk about is a guy named Lucius Larrabee, who was at Graceland Cemetery. Now, he was a member of the Chicago Zouaves, a drill team that kind of sounds like Cirque du Soleil, the way they described it later. He ended up fighting in the Battle of Bull Run after the war started, and after the battle needed a finger amputated. So they brought out the cart of ether, and he said, no, I don't need any of that stuff. I was a Zouave. Just cut it off. And they said, are you sure? He said, yes, just cut my finger on off. So they amputated his finger. And he sat there for a second, then said, next time I will get the anesthesia. Hurt a lot more than he thought it was going to. And unfortunately, Captain Larrabee ended up being killed in the Battle of Gettysburg after fighting in all kinds of different battles. His gravestone lists all of the battles that he fought in. It's like one major battle after another. But same is true of a lot of the other people who are on here. Most of their sermons were given by Reverend Thomas Eddy, who was also at Graceland. Turns up on tours pretty regularly. But now we'll go down the block from that. As I said, in between the Trader Joe's and the parking garages, there are still some mansions that have somehow miraculously survived. Like, for instance, this one. Now, this was the mansion of a guy named Ransom R. Cable, who was president of the Rock Island Railroad. And that's about all I can tell you about him. So many of these guys, you can tell they must have had pretty good taste. But that's about all you can tell about them. Every biography is just what they owned. But in the back, there's even this magnificent garden. There's a whole shot of it. Now, this was designed by the architect Henry Ives Cobb in a style that at the time probably would have been called Richardsonian Romanesque. Henry Hobson Richardson was the first real rock star architect in the United States. He used to go around dressing in a hooded robe so he looked like a medieval monk. And his style was kind of like mixing old Gothic styles with big, bulky stones like the ones you see here. John Wellborn Root said it looked like bags of feathers all trustled together. Kind of jealous, perhaps. Henry Ives Cobb ended up designing quite a number of buildings around here and all over the Gold Coast and Prairie Avenue. He comes up quite a bit on these tours. He ended up taking the style a little bit further than Richardson had, partly just because he lived a lot longer. Part of the reason that this one is so well preserved is it came into the possession of Richard Dreyhouse, who died just a few months ago. He was a billionaire. He was an investor who pioneered the idea of momentum buying, which instead of buying low and selling high, you buy high and sell higher. Worked very well for him. He was very, very into historic preservation. I could almost guess that it was him just by the fact that there were some gas lights up on the houses around here. That's kind of a signature of buildings that he owned, is he loved having gas lights going. And he loved preserving things like the old statues out here. Or the fountain. The fountain was not turned on when I took this picture. I'm pretty sure I've seen it turned on before. But it may be one of those things where everybody swears they've seen it turned on, but nobody ever actually has. But he's got his, Dreyhouse has a lot of different buildings around here. Like right across the corner is one that is currently known as the Dreyhouse Museum. Now, there's two large buildings right here. Once again, Richard. The one on the left that he has now turned into a museum was originally owned by another businessman named Samuel Mayo Nickerson. Dude's middle name was Mayo. But after a while, it was sold to Lucius Fisher, a paper manufacturer, who is probably best remembered around here for buildings with his name on it, and in particular this columbarium at Graceland Cemetery that looks like just a regular headstone or monument, but underneath the sleeve of that angel there's a keyhole. That front statue is actually a door. The ashes are on the inside of it. He is also the namesake of the Fisher Building, built by the Daniel Burnham Company, that turns up on quite a lot of our tours, most particularly Architecture of Mysterious Chicago that we did last week. But after years of being, for a long time it was run by the College of Surgeons. It was bought and presented to them. Now this building that you see on the right over here with the two columns was originally the American College of Surgeons Auditorium. It was the place where they would do things like demonstrate surgeries and probably dissect cadavers. It did happen to look almost exactly like the old Iroquois Theater. One of the ghost tour companies I used to work for, I specifically remember driving by this with the boss, and the boss saying, "We've got to make up a ghost story about that place. Just look at it." Never did make one up about it. We almost didn't have to. See, we'll cover it in a second, but over on the left, let's talk just a little bit more about this gorgeous mansion. So this is what the entrance hall looked like on the inside years and years ago. We only ever see these kind of pictures in black and white, so it's hard to picture just how bright and splendid they might have been. But after it became the Dreyhouse Museum, Dreyhouse turned this into like a museum of what Gilded Age mansions were like. So it's restored about as well as they possibly can. This is what it looks like today. And if you go onto their website, you can probably find, I believe they have a video tour and everything that I didn't want to pirate to put over on here. But the Murphy Memorial Auditorium right next door, where they quite likely used to dissect cadavers. Now, in the 1950s, there was an article in the Chicago Tribune about some house on Erie Street. It was a broader article about haunted houses throughout Chicago. One of them was they mentioned a house on Erie Street that was once used by the old College of Surgeons, or the National Medical College, where they said that they could hear the sound of carriages being driven up in the middle of the night to deliver cadavers, like ghostly grave robbers arriving at the place. Unfortunately, they did not specify exactly which house on Erie Street it was, or even which block it was, or anything, so it could have been either of these, but they're not the only houses around here that have a grave robbing connection. Now, if we zip about 4 blocks west here on Erie Street, we will end up down here by the Hooters. And right across the street over here is another old house with some grave robbing connection. This is currently known as Flair House, after the advertising firm that bought it back in the 1960s. They bought this place for $20,000 in 1964, which I think would have been a bargain even then, but so many things were just falling apart around the neighborhood at the time. But this place was built in 1875, built in 1883 by a guy named Marcus Devine, who was a milk dealer. But it also happens to be, today, right next to the Hooters. But the important thing to talk about here is the alley in between the two, in between Flair House and the Hooters. So in 1875, there was an issue where down on the south side, a woman was found frozen to death. Down on the corner of, I think it says, Emerald Avenue and 29th Street, a woman was found frozen to death. The two people who found the body initially were assumed to have murdered her, but really it turned out she had frozen. The story would have disappeared altogether after a couple of days, except that 10 days later her body was found in a barn that would have straddled the alley here based on the fire insurance maps. In between Flair House and the Hooters, right about, right where the porta potty is now, was a barn that was being used by grave robbers. Now, in 1875, the city of Chicago was providing the local medical colleges with all of the dead bodies they needed. They didn't need to rob a cemetery to get cadavers in Chicago anymore. But that didn't put Chicago grave robbers out of business. There was still a market in places like Ann Arbor, Michigan, Iowa City, Iowa. So they would dig up corpses here in Chicago, put them into barrels that were labeled like kerosene or poultry, and then store them in a barn until they could get them on a train. That barn was right here. 10 days after this poor woman was found frozen to death, her body was recovered here. And I bring this one up on the grave robbing tours quite a bit. It's almost an entertaining article talking about they go into great lurid detail about the naked dead people that they found in here. It's something that comes up quite a bit in grave robbing articles. Now, the Hooters has always talked about being haunted. They've never really had a good backstory for why, but this particular Hooters, they talk about hearing voices in the basement, feeling taps on their shoulders, and all of the references to nudity in these articles make that a pretty good candidate for who might be haunting the place, or at least a very amusing candidate. Well, let's move around to another amusing story here. Wrong thing up. On the left, the old Jekyll and Hyde Club. Later was like the ESPN Fun Zone. Now the AT&T store, among many different things that has been over the years. Originally it was like a telephone company building, and now it's an AT&T store. But I love this green building here. I'm a sucker for green buildings. This is the former Hotel Raleigh. The Hotel Raleigh at 648 North Dearborn, corner of Erie Street. Phone North 5980. New handsomely furnished outside rooms, hot and cold running water. Phone in every room. Elevator and bellboy service day and night. Rates were running $3.50 to $8 per week. 5-minute walk to the Loop. I love that. We're also going to check, there's really not too many great stories about this. It is thought to have been designed by the architect Lars Holberg, who is probably best known now for the Sanborn Coffee Warehouse right across Wells Street from the Merchandise Mart on the Chicago River. But let's move to the place next door. And once again, we're really talking about what used to be next door. This little place where a psychic is hawking her wares on the second floor now. But here at 642, the old 642 North Dearborn, there was a house. This place was built about 1880. Just before it was built, there was a building there that probably looked about like this, probably a little bit grubbier. But it was occupied by a guy by the name of Charles Guiteau. Now, Charles Guiteau came to Chicago to work as a lawyer. Here he is, the lawyer who is out to get $100,000 out of the New York Herald for libel. Now, I doubt he won this. Charles Guiteau had cheated his way through the bar. He had no idea how to be a lawyer, lost every case. But it would have been nice if he managed to sue the New York Herald successfully. Those guys really sucked. They were one of those pro-slavery papers during the Civil War. But after he failed at being a lawyer, he became a preacher. He ended up writing a book called The Truth, which put forth the proposition that modern Christians had all been wasting their time waiting for the second coming because it had already happened back in about the year 70 in the contemporary era. And everything else since then has just been blasphemy. But fortunately, he had the solution. He knew exactly what the real truth was. And the real truth, as he said it, was plagiarized almost line for line from the works of the guy who founded the Oneida Colony, a free-loved sect of which he had been a member in upstate New York. Now, Guiteau had gone to this place. Their philosophy was that anyone can be in love with anyone at any time. They had to change their minds after they met Charles Guiteau. So having failed as a free lover and as a fake preacher and as a fake lawyer, he decided the last refuge of the scoundrel would, of course, be politics. And when he failed at that, too, he got his revenge by assassinating President Garfield. Here's his tomb as it looked 5 or 10 years ago. But you might remember if you were here when we went to Cleveland's Lakeview Cemetery for the morning tour just a couple of weeks ago. They've cleaned it up remarkably since then. And in this is what I thought was just wild, was this fresco here, which I'll try to make as large as I can. One of the frescoes on the outside is Garfield on his deathbed after having been shot. Now, Guiteau's defense later on in the trial was, I didn't kill Garfield, the doctors did. Which was kind of fair. The doctors who, it wasn't so much the gunshot, it was the doctors kept on poking Garfield in the liver when they tried to get the bullet out. Alexander Graham Bell, who I think is in this fresco, showed up with a metal detector to try to find the bullets, but the whole bed was made out of metal, so it didn't do a whole lot of good. Now, he died after 3 or 4 agonizing months later on. Now, the tomb came into the news. The reason that I went there in the first place was there had been a news story that somebody broke into the place and stole a dozen commemorative spoons, of which the approximate retail value on the collector's market would have been about $11.99. These spoons sell for about $1 on eBay. It later turned out that it was a heroin addict who had snuck in and thought he was breaking into a castle and didn't remember why he had taken the spoons. But when I first went there, my theory was perhaps it was something to do with Guiteau. Guiteau had an outstanding lawsuit against the Oneida Colony at the time of his death. You know what the Oneida Colony does now? They're still around, but instead of having sex, they make silverware. Spoons! But if you ask me, the guy breaking in missed the real prize. There's like down in the lower level where the sarcophagi are, there's a display case of Garfield memorabilia. And he was only president for a few months, so the pickings are kind of slim. But among them is Garfield tea. Garfield brand laxative tea. You got to ask yourself, when I die, will there be a box of diarrhea tea with my face on it on prominent display next to my sarcophagus? And if not, what can I do to rectify this situation? Pun absolutely intended. Boxes of Garfield tea sell in about the $50 to $100 range on eBay. Oh, you might have noticed right next door to these places, I think a few people already noticed that right next door is a building probably best known in Chicago today as the old Excalibur Club. Most recently it was called Tao. It's also been the Castle nightclub. But generally the last several decades it has been a nightclub. When it was first built, it was designed by Henry Ives Cobb. You might recognize the style here from the other mansion that we saw, the Cable Mansion. But this was originally built to be the museum of the Chicago Historical Society around the turn of the 20th century. There's a fresco over here showing people, a little out of date one now, showing the arrival of the Europeans in Chicago. So, this is kind of a challenging one for ghost people in Chicago, because the employees at the Excalibur Club definitely think that the place is haunted. But none of the backstories that the place has spread around have ever really held up to a lot of fact-checking. The most popular is they like to say that bodies from the Eastland disaster were taken there. They actually certainly were not. There's a story about a kid dying in the elevator shaft, which I don't believe ever happened here. Something similar happened at the Metro, and they kind of got the nightclubs confused. But there was, at one time, a dead body on display in this place. Now, you might remember yesterday, especially if you were on the walking tour, or other recent ones, we talked just a little bit about John Kinsey, one of the early settlers here, and possibly our first murderer. He killed another early settler named Jean Lalim, in which what some people called self-defense, but others believed was the perfect assassination. Jean Lalim was buried right where the original St. James Episcopal Church was, before they moved it a couple of blocks north. Then around 1890, they were doing some construction, putting up the building where the Jazz Record Mart was for several decades. And while they were digging, the workers came upon this like rude pine box that was full of human bones. And they were very casual about it. They seemed to think it was hilarious. There was newspapers described like kids playing soccer with the skull. But one guy walking by realized that they were right about in the place where that old settler Jean Lalim had been buried. So they laid it out on a table, had an inquest, and decided that as far as they could tell, these were probably the bones of Jean Lalim, and they were presented as a gift to the Chicago Historical Society. And I always used to joke, well, I'm sure they were just thrilled, too. Apparently they were, because when they first opened, they did in fact have his bones on display in a glass case on the second floor of this place. The Chicago Historical Society still has them. They don't keep them on display anymore. They're in an off-site warehouse. They just bring them in now and then for measuring and photography. But when this place first opened as a museum, they were on display in there. And in part of the Excalibur's stage show, they used to claim that the bones were then destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say given the fact that they weren't even dug up until about 20 years later. But speaking of things being destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire, we'll zip around here to the side a bit. And this gorgeous building, also right here in River North, is currently known as Tree Studios. Let's walk around a little closer. Well, now it's a shopping center. But originally, this place was built as an artist colony. And the sign for it, at least, still survives. If we move right across the street right here, Studio Building. The place was built by Judge Lambert Tree, photographed here by the famous Matthew Brady. Now, Matthew Brady was the son-in-law of an early Chicago dry goods merchant and financier named H.H. McGee. if you've been on the Graceland tours, he comes up quite a bit because H.H. McGee was the guy who initially built this tomb. Lambert Tree was the guy who sold it off to G.M. Stevens, had everybody's bodies hauled out of there and reburied. If I were H.H. McGee, I always say I would hunt the crap out of that kid. But the Tree Studio building currently stands on the site of the old H.H. McGee homestead. It was a mansion surrounded by a large front yard at the time. When the Great Chicago Fire broke out, quite a lot of people thought that old Mr. McGee's house would have been the perfect place to hide out because there was such a large lawn that they figured it wouldn't burn down. So everybody, including Judge Lambert Tree and his family and several of the neighbors, stashed their valuables in the yard, got inside of the place, and figured, all right, now we're safe. But then the trees in the yard caught fire, and it turned out they had really broken themselves into a trap. They were absolutely stuck inside of this place until just enough of the fence had burned down that they were able to make an escape. Now, Judge Tree escaped along with a family known as the Butterfields. They got about as far north as Chicago Avenue, nearly 2 blocks north, and then figured, okay, we're safe now. And this is kind of something you notice a lot in Chicago fire narratives. People would get about 2 blocks away and figure, okay, now we're safe. Then that area would start burning. They'd get another 2 blocks and again think, now we're safe. So finally, Judge Tree decided, okay, we're not going to be safe in another 2 blocks. Found a guy with a carriage, offered him $10 to get them as far away as he could. So they ended up sharing the carriage with a family called the Butterfields. The kid down on the back is Justin. This is a drawing that he did of his family escaping the fire, including his beloved pet goat who came along with them. And this has recently been the subject of a children's book, in fact, Justin and his pet goat escaping the Great Chicago Fire. Judge Tree even mentioned the goat when he reminisced about this years and years later. But when the house burned down, after H.H. McGee died, the property came into possession of Judge Lambert Tree, who built up this studio building for artists to live in. Let me get it back to one of the fuller pictures of it. So this became an artist colony. Here are some of the artists. Of the ones here, the sculptor Julia Bracken is probably the most famous of these ones. Now, officially, the rule here was no children were allowed. Now, they just kind of thought that children would kind of spoil the tone of the place. This was an adult, a serious environment. But then one day, somebody left a baby on the doorstep, and the reaction of the artist was, can we keep him? They left a baby here. They initially named it Rembrandt Michelangelo, but then somebody prevailed on them to give it the more common name of James Vincent Whistler. And for a while it was even noted in the press that the judge had allowed the artist colony to adopt this baby, and he was going to be raised as an artist within the Tree Studio. After a couple of years, he was more formally adopted by a couple that lived elsewhere. Probably underwent the name change as well, so really, I have no idea whatever happened to Baby Rembrandt. It's one of those great Chicago mysteries, and it's highly unlikely, in fact, that Baby Rembrandt even grew up ever realizing that he had ever been Baby Rembrandt. We'll go around the corner from here a little ways. Quite a few here where I hadn't fixed up the pictures right. But here is the former Lowry's Steakhouse. They have now moved out, and based on comments they made at the time, good riddance. But really, it is just the bottom shell of a former mansion. It originally looked like this. And if you walk around on the side of it a little bit, you can still see areas where where a little bit of the mansion still survives beyond just the first floor. But this was the mansion of L. Hamilton McCormick. Now, L. Hamilton McCormick was a nephew of Cyrus McCormick, who moved here with his brothers in the 1850s, having invented the mechanical reaper, which wasn't really that easy to market in the South in the 1850s, where farm labor-saving devices were considered to be of limited use, but it sold very well in Chicago. The McCormicks got really rich, and all hated each other's guts. And they were right to do so. These guys were all a bunch of jerks. William and Leander hated Cyrus. Cyrus hated William and Leander. All of them deserved it pretty well. They all were openly rooting for the South during the Civil War. Now, Leander had a son named Leander Hamilton McCormick. This became his mansion nearby. Now, besides working in the family business of farm equipment, L. Hamilton McCormick also wrote a book called Characterology, an Exact Science. Now, this was building on phrenology, the idea that the bumps and ridges on your skull could tell a lot about you. He went on to include, like, the shape of your nose, most particularly your race, and what that could say about you. You can probably imagine where the guy was going with this. It wasn't necessarily uncommon beliefs in those days, but making a hobby and writing whole books about it was not entirely common. And meanwhile, the people who ran Lowry's Steakhouse in the place recently said that they closed down partly because of the pandemic, but more because of Black Lives Matter protesters. So, good riddance to an already broken mansion, if you ask me. But it operated under several different restaurants over the years. The most famous of what was one that had a puppet theater on the inside, a puppet opera, and children who came inside of the place got to have got a free ticket to see the puppet opera as well. Now, L. Hamilton lived right down the block from his father's house. Let me restart that video. So here we are at the right on the end there. You could see the old mansion. And here you can see we're actually right close to the Dreyhouse Museum and the old National Medical College Auditorium, but this was the mansion of Leander McCormick himself. Get a little bit of a clearer view there. And here's Leander looking all sad, as though somebody just told him that the South lost the Civil War. Now, his mansion is still standing. There is a plaque on it that mentions towards the bottom that people used to call this neighborhood McCormickville. And in fact, the Chicago Preservation Society has been lobbying to have the neighborhood formally designated as historic McCormickville. I've been writing them letters suggesting otherwise, partly because the McCormicks were such a bunch of jerks, and partly because it's not really historically accurate. If you look it up around the 1920s or so, people start saying it could have been known as McCormickville because there were so many. Then in the 1950s, the story shifts to it was referred to as McCormickville. I can't find anybody from the era when all the McCormicks lived there actually calling it that. It's just one of those things. It's kind of like Beer Baron Row in Wicker Park, which you'll see article after article saying this section of Hoyne Street was known as Beer Baron Row for all the beer barons who lived there. But nobody called it that till the 1990s, and there don't appear to have ever actually been a beer baron living there. Well, let's move down the block from this a little bit. We've been to this place on the time travel pub crawls, currently known as the Kerryman. It's a building that dates way back to the 19th century and has been a tavern pretty continuously, though under a lot of different names. Currently the Kerryman, but for a long time and probably best known as the McGovern Brothers Liberty Inn. That's a picture of how it looked at the time. Hard to recognize with all of the awnings there. Now here's one of their original Christmas advertisements. Merry Christmas and a joyous New Year to you and you and you and you from the McGovern's Liberty Inn. It's an institution, 3 minutes to the loop. This makes it look like it was a really wholesome family place. It was not. Here are a couple of their matchbooks from the mid-20th century, around the same time that Christmas ad came out. And they had previously been known all throughout the 1920s as one of the most openly liquor-serving places during Prohibition. And in fact, in the 1910s, one of their singing waiters had been a little kid named Dean O'Banion, who would go on to become the head of the North Side Mob prior to his murder in 1924. Now, for years, I thought the story that he was the singing waiter at the place was one of those things that was going to turn out to be an old urban legend that probably wasn't even an old urban legend, probably started in the 1970s or something. But on digging in, lo and behold, within a week of his murder in 1924, there were all kinds of reminiscences about how he was a singing waiter at this place, and even how that was how he got involved in gang life. One day, Eugene Geary came busting into the place, having just robbed a place on the south side, demanding that somebody sing him a song, and Dean O'Banion just charmed him with his wonderful voice. By the 1980s, in fact, because of it, it even became a punk club called O'Banion's. You can see here the place was in kind of need of some repair. It's been greatly fixed up by now. And off in the background there you can see Marina City Towers. There's quite a lot less in the neighborhood in the 1970s. That's probably why Flair House cost $20,000 at the time. And proceeding a little bit further west, to get over onto Wells Street here, there's a couple of buildings of note right here. The first is the Prosico building. which people who work in this place have told me that it is haunted. I couldn't find a lot of specific stories about that building itself that would explain why the place might be haunted, but they talk about seeing bullet holes down in the basement and feeling people tap on their shoulders, very similar to the stories they tell over at the Hooters not too far away. But right next door to it, if you look at this building on the left, there would be much easier to come up with stories there, especially if the basement of this place used to extend over next door, which it may very well have done. This on the left was the old Sparbarro funeral home where Dino Banion's funeral was held, and indeed where most of the big mob funerals of the 1920s were held, at the time when mob funerals were a really big affair. Like, here's a picture from Dino Banion's funeral, thousands of people lining up outside of this place. You can see it just a bit there. On the far right is the Persico building. The much lighter one next to it is Sparbarro. And here it is, a little bit better view for Vinny the Schemer Drucci when he was shot to death in the 1970s. Now check out just above the V there on the post, you can see that oval-shaped thing. That oval-shaped thing, I don't know if it actually lights up or if it's just strictly an ornamentation, but those things, in fact, are still there. Now, I can't say with 100% certainty that these are the original ones that were there in the 1920s. They might have been restored or replaced at some place, but they do, in fact, seem to still be standing on the place to this day. You can see them over there on the left. Now, the place was run by a guy named John Sparbarro, who really ran the funeral home as a side hustle. He was actually an assistant taste attorney who worked on the Leopold and Loeb case, but also in the 1920s, like so many other people, and given how many mob connections you would have had working at this place, running all of their funerals, it's almost inevitable that he got involved in bootlegging. But getting involved in bootlegging wasn't that safe for him either, and the place ended up getting bombed out in the mid-1920s, late 1920s, 1928. And there's even a picture of it as, here's how it looked after it had been bombed in 1928. And right there on the post on the right, there it is again. You can see one of those light fixtures. Move in for a close-up on it here. Real relic of Chicago gangland that's still there right in plain sight that people don't really realize. I mean, we spend so much time claiming that there's a bullet hole in the Holy Name Cathedral. There's really not. But those ones are actually a much better view, I think, and seem to be much more authentic. And one cool murder story I found from inside of the place, in 1931 there was an inquest of a body of a man who had been shot to death. His sister stood up and pointed at a woman and saying, You are the one who killed my brother. Now, the story, as it was first reported, was that this woman had shot the guy and then tried to shoot herself because she caught him with another woman. Later, it turned out she was a girl from Arkansas who had been lured up by this guy and a couple of his friends to the big city saying, Hey, we've got a great job for you. You'll love it. That turned out to be in a house of ill repute that is still standing up on near Clark and Belmont. Not a house of ill repute anymore, but it was at the time. She ended up shooting herself trying to get out of it. It was ruled self-defense pretty quickly. Apparently she had said she wanted to leave. He said, You'll have to kill me first. Then she said, Well, I will. And he handed her a pistol and said, I dare you then. Go ahead, shoot me. I dare you. Wrong thing to say because she did exactly that. Now, this is a really cool article about it from the Chicago Times, a newspaper that covered the Helen Deal story way more than most people did. I love this thing, the new Hollywood Queen loom showing that Marlene Dietrich was about to take over Hollywood. There's also some other cool stories down below. The jazz age is on the wane now that candy was more expensive. And Tex Guinan, who turns up quite a bit on the time travel pub crawls, was sailing home. Now let's zip just a little bit away from here. Here's Sparbarro and Persico again. If you turn around the corner, you get to this very nice looking building at the corner of Wells and Superior. Now Wells and Superior in the 1970s was bought by these four people, right out of the 1970s, who turned it into a place called the Mirage Watering Hole. Here's a shot of them in color. Now, this place was falling apart at the time. There were things like the ceilings were absolutely leaking. The place seemed like it could have collapsed any second. Health code violations everywhere. But they figured out this was the best way to do things was the Chicago way, which was just paying people off. Here's a picture of the fire inspector taking a $10 payoff, $10 whole, to avoid even looking at the place for fire code violations. This turned out to be a mistake on his part because those 4 people were actually working for the Chicago Sun-Times. They had bought up the place strictly to see how many people, fire inspectors, police officers, etc., asked them for a bribe. And pretty much everybody did. Most of these were of low number bribes, like $10 to $50. The idea was a lot of these inspectors were working on the supermarket plan. Low margins, but really high volume. They'd even talk to accountants. Every accountant they talked to told them, yeah, here's how you do it. You're going to have 2 different books. You're going to make the payoffs in cash. They also all said the most important thing is never bribe a cop. Not that they won't take a bribe, but it's like a stray dog, feeding a stray dog. If you bribe them once, they're going to be coming back and wanting more every single day. And because of this expose, a lot of the laws ended up being changed. There ended up being a lot of reforms that came from this. Nobody actually went to jail, but a lot of fines were paid, and a lot of people lost their jobs. That kind of stuff is, I wouldn't say it has gone away from Chicago or any other large city, but it's certainly a lot harder to get away with nowadays than it would have been back in the 1970s. All right, let's cover one more thing really quick here. Let's go down the block. This was all under construction when I did the filming here. Now, first of all, we've got this space here was once the... Oh, I got the wrong one. We'll move up onto this. 436 North Clark. Designed by William Boyington, who also did things like the gates at Rose Hill Cemetery, the water tower. If you saw our quick tour of the Iowa Governor's Mansion last month, also designed this. This was a lunchroom for a long time, where one day in 1934, Claude Shipley, a busboy, found out that he had inherited his wife's $27,000 estate. Look at this. My aunt's dead. Now, it's probably best known now for several years this was the Baton Club, one of the biggest and most famous drag clubs in Chicago, which has now moved up to the north side. But right across from this, in 1863, before the Great Chicago Fire, there was a photographer's studio right in this space, run by a guy by the name of Jay Battersby. Jay Battersby is, there's this terrific letter that he wrote advertising his services. He referred to himself as a second-class photographer. And down at the bottom is this one note, P.S. If my name is not suggestive of a beer barrel or a shower bath, it is my misfortune and not my fault. I don't know what he means by that. I also don't know why I seem to have frozen right there, but I can fix that. Usually just by going like this, and I'm back. But Jay Battersby was most known as a photographer for doing photographs of circus performers. Like this one right here. There was also a Jay Battersby who was worked as a thin man in circuses, but one thing I haven't been able to figure out for sure is whether Jay Battersby the thin man and Jay Batterson the circus photographer were the same guy. It's one of those mysteries that I was working on when I first did this tour, but then I had to move on to the next tour. So we'll get caught up on this stuff over the course of the next few months, I am sure. But alright everybody, that was Mansions and Mysteries in River North. Let me do a quick plug for some of the upcoming tours here. So this week is going to be H.H. Holmes week. Thursday night we're doing a variation on my usual H.H. Holmes presentation called The Victims of H.H. Holmes. I only did this one once before, way back in September, and instead of just tracing Holmes' whole career, this is going to be what biographies we know of his various victims. I'll look at some of the people who were considered maybes, people who have been debunked as victims, people who were that he claimed to have killed but were still alive at the time. And we'll follow that up Saturday evening. Saturday has been in-person tour day, so Saturday evening, June 26th, in the Loop, we're doing one of my tours called H.H. Holmes, The Devil Downtown, where we will trace his career by walking through the Loop to buildings that we can actually trace him to that are still standing. We can trace his footprints all over the Loop. The tickets for that are still available. They are up on MysteriousChicago.com. Then Sunday morning, a week from today, I just realized I haven't it's been like way over 6 months since I last did silent film in Chicago. So that seems like a fun one to bring back. So silent film in Chicago coming back next week. There was a period when Chicago was the place to go to get a movie made. It's kind of forgotten now, but I ended up doing a whole book about it a few years back. Now, once again, if you need a Mysterious Chicago t-shirt, hoodie, sweatshirt, etc., or one for the Dead Ringers, the barbershop quartet that keeps showing up on our time travel pub crawls, go to cafepress.com/Mysterious Chicago. Like these fine Georgia voters, including my dad in the background. Happy Father's Day, Dad, if you're not too busy cleaning right now to say this one. And with that, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. We will put the Earl Father Hines back on for Father's Day, and we will go back to just hanging out like we always do. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Molly. Thanks, Jay and Aaron. Thank you, Grace. I'm finding that doing the extra tour per week as a walking tour is kind of hitting my voice. It'll strengthen up. It's also the weather will do that. Thanks, Marita. Bob, I'm sure Miles will show up. I just got to find him. He was climbing all over me while I was putting the tour together this morning. Or putting it back together. Lately, I cannot sit at my desk without him showing up and wanting to climb up me and play. But Karina, I like using music that was recorded in Chicago, and especially if it's far enough back that I won't get a copyright ding over it. This was Earl Father Hines at the Grand Terrace Cafe, a building that still stands down in Bronzeville. Thanks, Rodney. I hear today is not as hot. That's nice. We got some storms coming in, it sounds like. Swig of whiskey would be a good idea. I'm not gonna say I never take a swig just for my throat early before the 10 a.m. tours. All right, let me go find the Miles. Oh, here he is. Found him. He was in my sock drawer. Here, Miles, hop up and say hi to the nice people. Live from Adam's sock drawer. Thanks, Jen. Walked out to find him, and there was his head poking out from the cabinet. Well, we'll just see if he wants to stay in there. I'll go put this back. I can always tell if he's been in there because I'll see like 4 or 5 pairs of socks on the floor in front of the cabinet that he'll pull out to make room for himself. Thanks, Kelly. Matt, I'm planning on doing some more. I would have done yesterday hybrid, but I couldn't get I can't always get a cameraman for it in short notice. Well, here he comes. Yeah? Pick you up. Pick up the baby Miles.
Now comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled The ironically, a little kiss at twilight.
Anita, not necessarily, but it depends on whether they got landmark protection or not. Yeah, George Perlman had 4 children. They turned out awful. His daughters, I don't think, were so bad, but his sons were often held up as a warning to rich parents. And that comes up on the Prairie Avenue tour sometimes. Libby, Miles has been pretty clingy and very playful lately. He wants to chase stuff around all the time. Now, once Aiden moves in for college, I'll have a cameraman much more often. Hey, no one over on YouTube. If anyone's just joining you, I'll remind you that this is the end of the tour. We started about an hour ago. But once we're done with the post-tour hangout, it'll be up in the videos section. Yeah, George, you heard me. Your kids who got kicked out of one school after another. Thanks, ML. Thanks, no one on YouTube. Offhand, the Pullman's Kids thing is another one where the details are kind of escaping me. I'd have to re-look at it before next time we do the Prairie Avenue tour. Well, my tour will be on July 1st. Not off the top of my head yet. Which day is July 1st? July 1st is a Thursday. No, I don't know what to do with it for next Thursday yet. I'm open to suggestions for which one I should bring back. I don't think I'll have time to put a whole new one together by then, but maybe. Patty, Miles will definitely have a buddy, but we're waiting till Aiden moves in for college. Thanks, Ian. And so far, the market is so weird right now for in-person tours that I'm just kind of taking things a week at a time. Gotcha, George. Halloween, I know right around Halloween I'm going to have stuff for the Lincoln Park Zoo. Laura, this Saturday tour for the Devil Downtown meets at the LaSalle Wacker building at LaSalle and Wacker. Now, Prairie Avenue I've done previously as a virtual tour. It's such a narrow space that doing it as a walking tour might be tricky, and it's also residential, you don't want to get on people's nerves too much. And we were just talking about maybe doing the boat tour in person when the Mysterian Gathering happens on October 1st through 3rd. October 1st is a Friday, that might be a good day to do it. It's trickier to do the boat tours because there's a lot more overhead. So if it doesn't sell, I'm really in the soup. But if anybody here is not already on it, there is a group on Facebook called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and the Miles Fan Club. We're going to be doing kind of Mysterian Con October 1st through 3rd. Once again, in-person events are just such a weird market right now that it's hard to plan ahead for much. Mandy, yeah, I think I was just thinking it's been a while since we did After Hours, and sometime in July I will definitely do another Tiki version of the Time Travel Pub Crawl. That's definitely in the plans. Oh, Laura, those are pretty good numbers. So, yeah, I'll email the boat and see what kind of rate they can get me for that Friday night. Saturday night, the tickets aren't out yet, but I will be doing the Lincoln Park Haunted History Tours. I try to keep the prices low on the boat tours, or lower than the next leading brand, anyway. But again, the overhead on it is really high. Thanks, Mandy. July 1st, I think, After Hours, that seems like a good day for After Hours. Miles. Hey, look who's back. Say hi to all the nice people, Miles. Miles got his nails trimmed last night. We taught him well. Ronnie taught him well. He loves getting his nails trimmed. She taught him to enjoy it when he was just a kitten. And he just purrs and purrs when he gets his nails trimmed now. How many are needed for a boat tour? Depends. I also got to see what kind of capacity limits they're going to be having right now. But usually I have to about the boat that I usually work on holds about 150. But I got to sell a pretty good chunk of it just to break even. Look, Karen's mostly a matter of petting and cuddling them while we do it. You got to start when they're young, though, I think. But Charlotte loved it, too. But once again, we taught her when she was young.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a program for you epicures. You swing epicures who like your music really jived in top style. Earl Father Hines and his great orchestra have been playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. A program that reached you from Chicago. This is the
Stay safe, Bob.
Broadcasting Company.
Yeah, I'll email the boat and see what their rates are for this year. I got to rewind Earl a little bit. Where's that button? There it is. Make sure none of these are angry messages. Looks like not. That's good. Yeah, if I want to make sure I get Friday, October 1st, I'll have to, Okay, getting a lot of texts about definitely an upcoming Tiki tour. Well, we did one last year, but I liked the places. We could probably do them again. And we didn't have the Dead Ringers last time either. So, alright, Eli's probably up now since he had to walk the dog. We can text him right now.
We turn on now to next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Alright, I've just messaged the Dead Ringer Quartet and informed them that a Tiki tour is coming. Alright, see you, Susan. Jordana, I still have so much blue curacao and orange curacao left from last year's Tiki tour. Hey, Amy. Carrie, I tried to do a whole children's book about Finders Incorporated. It never came out, but I used it as but Just Kill Me was a backdoor sequel. I used it as what I had written as the backstory. I had the characters be a little bit older. And now running a ghost tour company. It's a sequel to a book that never came out. Which is just the kind of thing I would do. Well, alright, we can just assume now, I think, for the next 2 Thursdays. This Thursday is Victims of H.H. Holmes. After that will be Mysterious Chicago After Hours. And then the 8th will be Time Travel Cub Crawl Goes Tiki. You know what I just watched this week is Back to the Beach with Frankie and Annette. So I remember seeing it in a theater when it came out. I would have been about 7. And most of the jokes would have been right over my head. I'd never seen an old Frankie and Annette Beach movie. Or an Annette peanut butter commercial. But it was still a fun movie. Patty, quite possibly. I haven't figured out what we're doing just yet. I see you, Carrie. And I know that I do have a Graceland slot booked for Saturday the 2nd to run a tour. I think it's Saturday the 2nd.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace.
Marie, I am not surprised to hear that.
The couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father Hines. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris saying Now It Can Be Told.
I stood in line for Star Wars Episode 3 with the kid who was the kid with the bucket on his head in Parenthood. Alright, thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Betsy. Now we got Miles right up. Hey, Miles. There you go. See, that's the nice, easy place for you to hang out. You can hang out up here and not be knocking things around. It's a brilliant concept. Even play the guitar or something. Yes, Kristen, I edited the recording a little bit so I don't have to hear a tisket a tasket, which even Ella could barely save. Well, alright everybody, you know what, I am getting awfully hungry for lunch right about now. I had a pretty light dinner last night now that I think about it. But alright, quick upcoming plug for the upcoming tours again. So we already know what the next couple of Thursdays are going to be after this now. That's unusual and kind of a load off of my shoulders. Next Thursday after this will be After Hours and the Time Travel Pub Crawl Tiki Edition. So next Thursday, though, is The Victims of H.H. Holmes, a whole biography about the Williams sisters, the Peitzels, the Connors, and plus a few other people that we strongly suspect he might have had something to do with. But also, Saturday on 8 p.m., our in-person tour for the week will follow that up with H.H. Holmes' The Devil Downtown. Tickets on sale now at MysteriousChicago.com. And Sunday morning, a week from today, Silent Film in Chicago, history and screenings of some of the movies themselves. So, all right, everybody, in the meantime, from Miles and myself... Mural Monday. And I will see you tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Try to stay dry with the thunderstorms coming in. And of course, thank you, Miles. Stay spooky.